With tears in her eyes, a single mother-to-be opened the wrong door and came face to face with the most feared CEO. A forbidden love that would change their lives forever. A story of overcoming, redemption, and love. Get ready, because this story will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, and comment where you are watching from. The March rain fell relentlessly on Fifth Avenue, turning the sidewalks into grey mirrors reflecting the lights of the skyscrapers. Sarah Johnson gripped the frayed strap of her synthetic leather bag tightly, trying to protect the pregnancy. Documents inside a plastic folder that had already yellowed with age. At 7 months pregnant, each step required extra effort, and the back pain seemed to intensify with every floor she climbed in Corporate Tower, the most imposing commercial building in the area. 20th floor, office 2015, she murmured to herself, checking the crumpled paper in her pocket for the 10th time. The address of the Municipal Social Services Office was written in the hurried handwriting of the health clinic receptionist. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the expensive perfume of the executives sharing the elevator with her, a mix of imported colognes and espresso that only served to highlight her out-of-place presence in that luxurious environment. She wore a beige wool coat that had seen better days, bought on sale 2 winters ago when she still dreamed that the father of her daughter would stay by her side. The prominent belly stretched the fabric uncomfortably, but it was the only piece of clothing that still fit her changing body. Her naturally wavy brown hair was damp from the drizzle and clung to her flushed face from nerves. The 20th floor revealed a labyrinth of corridors lined with travertine marble, with LED lights casting a cold white glow over the golden plaques of the companies. Sarah walked slowly, feeling her swollen legs protest against the flat shoes that pinched her feet. The silence was broken only by the discreet hum of the air conditioning and the muffled sound of conversations in English leaking from some offices. 2013? 2014? She counted the numbers softly, running her free hand over her belly in an instinctive gesture of protection. The baby stirred restlessly, as if sensing her mother's tension. Sarah had left home at 6 in the morning, taken 2 buses and a subway. To get there, the medical appointment the previous week had confirmed her worst fears. She would need to take time off work in the coming weeks, and without the income from her job at the local veterinary clinic, she wouldn't even be able to afford diapers. The door to Office 2015 was slightly ajar, but Sarah hesitated before knocking. Her hands trembled. She didn't know if it was from the pregnancy, the nerves, or the cold that seemed more intense on this floor. She had spent the previous night organizing all the necessary documents: work permit, income statements, medical exams, birth certificate. Each paper represented a humiliation she had to swallow to ensure a better future for her daughter. "Excuse me?" she called softly, pushing the door open carefully. "Mrs. Smith?" The environment that revealed itself before her eyes was light years away from what she expected to find. Instead of the peeling walls and formica furniture that characterized the public offices she knew, Sarah found herself in an office that looked like it had come straight out of a decor magazine. The floor was polished hardwood, the walls covered in dark oak panels, and a panoramic view of the city stretched across floor-to-ceiling windows. Behind a mahogany desk that must have cost more than her annual salary sat a man she recognized immediately, even though she had never seen him in person. David Anderson frequently appeared in the business sections of newspapers and social columns, always described as the most ruthless CEO in the American financial market. At 35, he commanded an investment empire that moved billions and had a reputation for never losing a deal. He lifted his eyes from the papers he was analyzing, and Sarah felt as if time had stopped. His eyes were a steely grey that seemed to see through people, analyzing every detail with the precision of someone used to evaluating risks and opportunities in fractions of a second. The suit was perfectly tailored, accentuating his broad shoulders and the upright posture of someone who had never had to bow to anyone. His dark hair was impeccably styled, with not a strand out of place. "I'm sorry, Sarah stammered, feeling the tears she had managed to control during the entire journey burning her eyes again. "I was looking for the Social Services Office, Office 215. You must have confused me with the numbering." David Anderson remained silent for a few seconds that felt eternal. His eyes scanned her figure, the rain-drenched hair, the worn coat stretched over her belly, the tears she tried to hide by quickly wiping with the back of her hand. There was something about the vulnerability of that woman that struck him in a completely unexpected way. "The renovations in the building changed the numbering of the offices," he finally said, in a deep, controlled voice she had heard in TV interviews. "The office you're looking for should be on the lower floor." Sarah nodded quickly, mummified by the situation. "Thank you, very much. I'm really sorry for bothering you." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her mid-motion. "Wait." David Anderson stood up from his chair for the first time in hours, and Sarah noticed how tall he was. He must have been nearly 6'3". He walked around the desk with confident movements, and she noticed that he walked with a slight limp, almost imperceptibly. "It's raining heavily out there," he said, walking over to one of the windows, "and it looks like it will—" Sarah couldn't understand why one of the most powerful men in the country was worried about the weather. I have an umbrella," she lied, knowing that the small object had broken the week before. "What's your name?" he asked, and there was something in his voice that sounded different, less formal, more human. Sarah Johnson. David Anderson," he introduced himself, although both knew that introductions were unnecessary. "When is the baby due?" The question caught her off guard. Sarah instinctively placed her hand on her belly. "End of May, just over 2 months to go." "Is this your first daughter?" "Yes," she replied, wondering why she was having this strange conversation with a stranger. "How do you know it's a girl?" "Intuition," he said, and for the first time since entering the room, Sarah saw the hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "My secretary is at lunch, but I can call the office you're looking for. Maybe I can expedite your appointment." "You don't need to bother," Sarah protested, but he had already picked up the phone. As David made the call, Sarah took the opportunity to observe the office more closely. There were framed diplomas on the wall, a degree in economics from NYU, an MBA from Harvard, various business awards. A photo of him shaking hands with the governor occupied a corner of the shelf, next to books on investment strategies and biographies of great entrepreneurs. "Miss Smith will see you in 15 minutes, he said, hanging up the phone. "It's on the 19th floor, office 1923. The elevator is having issues today, but the stairs are safe." "Thank you very much," Sarah said, genuinely surprised by the unexpected kindness. "I don't know how to thank you." "There's no need to thank me," David replied, returning to his desk. "Just be careful on the stairs. The renovations left some areas poorly marked." There was something in his voice that suggested more concern than the situation warranted, but Sarah couldn't decipher what was going through the mind of that enigmatic man. She waved a silent goodbye and headed for the door, still processing the strangeness of that encounter. "Sarah!" he called as she was already in the hallway. She turned, framing herself in the half-open door. "Good luck with your daughter." The sincerity in his voice touched her in a way she couldn't explain. "Thank you." When the door closed behind her, Sarah stood in the hallway for a few seconds, trying to process what had just happened. David Anderson, the man who fired employees without a second thought and closed deals that affected thousands of lives, had shown kindness to a complete stranger who had barged into his office crying. On the other side of the door, David remained standing by the window, watching the rain continue to fall over the city. There was something in the silent determination of that woman, in the way she protected her belly even while clearly scared, that awakened in him a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. For the first time in a long time, his thoughts weren't occupied with spreadsheets, market strategies, or board meetings. He was thinking about a pregnant woman with brown eyes who had entered his life by chance, or perhaps by fate. 3 weeks had passed since the unexpected meeting in the office, and Sarah was trying to convince herself that it had been just an isolated episode in her increasingly complicated routine. The appointment with the social worker had resulted in a spot at the municipal daycare, but only after the baby was born, which didn't solve her immediate problems. Her supervisor at the veterinary clinic, Dr. Smith, a 50-year-old man with reading glasses always hanging around his neck, had been understanding of her growing limitations, but she could see the concern in his eyes every time she needed to sit down to rest her swollen legs. The small 2-bedroom apartment she shared with her sister Carla in Brooklyn was becoming too cramped for 2 adults, and soon a child. Carla, at 23, worked as a waitress in a diner near Times Square and always came home after midnight, exhausted and smelling of beer and fried food. The two had completely opposite personalities. Where Sarah was cautious and planner, Carla was impulsive and dreamy, always involved with some boyfriend who promised to change her life but never lasted more than a few months. "Sis, you have to stop worrying so much," Carla would say as she took off her shoes in the narrow hallway, leaving them tossed next to the door. "Things always work out in the end." "Easy for you to say when you're not the one who has to support a child," Sarah would reply, massaging her swollen ankles while watching the morning news on the small old television that sat on a chipped MDF rack. It was during one of those mornings that Sarah noticed something strange. Returning from a prenatal appointment at the local health clinic, she spotted a man in a suit, animatedly talking with Ms. Johnson, the building manager. Ms. Johnson was a 60-year-old woman with grey hair always tied in a tight bun, who knew the lives of all the residents in detail and didn't hesitate to share that information with anyone who showed interest. "Oh, Sarah, dear," Ms. Johnson called when she saw her approaching. "I'm glad you're here. This gentleman is from the building management, here to do an inspection." The man turned, and Sarah immediately recognized the private driver she had seen a few times entering the corporate tower, a tall, middle-aged man, always impeccably dressed. His name was Mr. Thompson, and he had worked for David Anderson for over 10 years. "Good afternoon, Ms. Johnson," Mr. Thompson greeted politely, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he knew exactly who she was. "Just checking some safety and maintenance issues. Nothing major." "The building was sold last month," Ms. Johnson explained, fanning herself with a grocery store flyer. "An investment company bought it. From what I understand, they want to make improvements." Marina nodded absently, but a strange feeling took over her. What investment firm would be interested in an old middle-class building in Brooklyn? The area was indeed appreciating, but it still seemed like too small of an investment for the type of company that usually appeared in the financial news. "Ms. Johnson mentioned that you are expecting a baby," Mr. Thompson said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Congratulations. If there are any noise issues during the renovations, just contact us." He handed her a card with a phone number and politely said goodbye. Marina watched as he got into a black Mercedes with tinted windows parked on the corner, the same car she had seen several times driving around the area in recent weeks. "What a classy guy," Ms. Johnson commented. "He said they really want to improve everything here. He even promised to renovate the common area and replace the elevators." "Ms. Johnson," Marina said, choosing her words carefully, "did you mention anything about my situation to that man?" Oh dear, you know how it is. We chat. Mention that you work so hard, pregnant and all. He asked if there were any residents in need, those things big companies ask nowadays to show social responsibility. Marina felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold April wind. She went up to her apartment on the 3rd floor with a growing feeling that she was being watched. From the living room window, which faced the street, she could see the Mercedes still parked on the corner with Mr. Thompson on the phone. That night, Lisa came home early from work and found Marina sitting at the kitchen table, absent-mindedly stirring a plate of instant noodles that had gone cold. "What's with that face, sis?" Lisa asked, throwing her bag on the sofa and grabbing a cold water bottle from the small fridge that shared space with the 4-burner stove. "Lisa, do you believe in coincidence?" "Depends. What kind of coincidence?" Marina told her about the meeting at the office, about Mr. Thompson's appearance, and about the mysterious sale of the building. Lisa listened in silence, nibbling on an apple as she processed the information. "Let me see if I understood," Lisa finally said. "You think the richest CEO in New York bought our building because you walked into his office crying? I know it sounds crazy." "It doesn't sound crazy. It is crazy," Lisa interrupted. "Sis, you're pregnant, working too much and stressed. Sometimes we see connections where there aren't any." But Marina couldn't shake the feeling that she was right. In the following days, she began to pay more attention to the details around her. The black Mercedes always appeared at the same times she left for her medical appointments. The diner on the corner, which had always struggled financially, had suddenly renewed its awning and installed new tables on the sidewalk. The owner, Mr. Johnson, a man of Portuguese descent who had lived in the US for 40 years, seemed inexplicably more cheerful. An investor showed up interested in helping small businesses in the area. Mr. Johnson explained when Marina asked about the improvements. He said he wants to enhance the neighborhood, keeping the local characteristics, but with better quality. And this investor, does he have a name? "Oh, I don't really know. The guy who came here was very polite, said he represents a large business group. He offered a loan with very low interest for the renovations." Marina ordered an orange juice and sat at one of the new tables watching the street activity. It was Thursday morning, and Brooklyn was in its usual rhythm. Parents dropping off kids at school, retirees chatting at the bakery, young people rushing to work downtown. That's when she saw him. David Anderson was standing across the street, in front of an art gallery that had closed the previous month. He was wearing a lighter grey suit than usual and sunglasses, but Marina would recognize him anywhere. He seemed to be watching something, and when she followed the direction of his gaze, she realized he was looking at her. Their eyes met across the flow of cars and pedestrians. For a moment, neither of them moved. Marina felt her heart race. She didn't know if it was fear, surprise, or something completely different. David slowly took off his sunglasses, revealing those slate-grey eyes she couldn't forget. He crossed the street with determined steps, skillfully avoiding a cyclist and 2 women, animatedly chatting without paying attention to the traffic. Marina noticed that several people recognized him. There were whispers and curious glances following his walk. "Marina," he said when he reached her table, and his voice sounded different outdoors, less formal, more personal. "What a coincidence to find you here." "Is it really a coincidence?" she asked directly, surprising herself with her own boldness. David hesitated for a fraction of a second before smiling, a genuine smile that completely transformed his expression. "May I sit?" Marina gestured to the chair in front of her. Mr. Johnson appeared immediately, visibly nervous about having such an important customer in his diner. "What would you like, sir?" he asked, wiping an unnecessary cloth on the already clean table. "A coffee, please. No sugar." When Mr. Johnson walked away, David focused on Marina. "To answer your question, no, it's not a coincidence. I live 2 blocks away. Since when? For 3 weeks. The honesty of the answer left her speechless for a few seconds. You bought our building. Yes. Why? David fell silent as Mr. Johnson brought the coffee, clearly trying to prolong his presence near the table as much as possible. When they were finally alone again, he spoke. Because 3 weeks ago, a pregnant woman walked into my office crying, and since then, I haven't been able to think of anything else. The brutal sincerity of the confession made Marina choke on her juice. That's insane, impulsive, completely out of my profile. David chuckled softly. I know. My lawyers thought I had lost my mind when I asked them to buy the building. My mother is convinced I'm going through an early midlife crisis. And are you? Maybe, or maybe I'm just realizing that there are more important things than spreadsheets and board meetings. Sarah looked at him, really looked. David Anderson, without the intimidating office environment, was a different man. Still impressive, still clearly accustomed to power, but there was a vulnerability in his eyes that she hadn't noticed before. Do you have family? She asked. I have a mother who would very much like to control my personal life, and a father who passed away when I was 15, he replied. And you, besides the sister who lives with you? Sarah was surprised that he knew about Lisa, but not as much as she should have been. My parents died in an accident when I was 17. Lisa is all I have. And the baby's father? The question she had both anticipated and dreaded. He's not part of our lives. That was his choice. David nodded without asking further questions, and she was grateful for his discretion. They remained in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the street activity. Sarah noticed several people passing slowly in front of the diner, clearly curious to see what David Anderson was doing having coffee at a plastic table in Brooklyn. People are looking, she commented. They always look. It's part of life for those with money. You become a public curiosity. Doesn't that bother you? It used to bother me. Now, not so much. He looked directly into her eyes. Some things are worth more than privacy. Sarah felt her cheeks warm and diverted her gaze to her belly. The baby was moving more than usual, as if sensing her mother's tension. She's restless today, she commented, running her hand over her belly in circular motions. May I? David asked, and there was something almost shy in his voice. Sarah hesitated. It was an intimacy she hadn't shared with anyone besides Lisa and the doctors. But something in his expression, a mix of curiosity and reverence, made her nod. David carefully extended his hand, touching Sarah's belly, with a surprising gentleness for someone used to commanding financial empires. His fingers were long and careful, lacking the roughness she expected from a businessman. Just at that moment, the baby kicked hard, right where his hand was resting. David's eyes widened, a spontaneous smile lighting up his face. She's strong, he said, still with his hand on Sarah's belly. Yes, the doctors say she's going to be a very active child. What are you going to name her? Sophia. Sophia Johnson. That's a beautiful name. There was something in the way he said the name that made Sarah's heart race again. They stayed like that for a few more seconds until Sarah realized they were being watched not only by the curious passers-by, but also by Mr. Johnson, who was not hiding his interest in the scene. I should head home, she said, gently removing his hand from her belly. Of course. David immediately stood up, pulling a $50 bill from his pocket. Allow me to pay. You don't have to. I insist. He left the money on the table and walked Sarah to the diner door. On the sidewalk, she turned to say goodbye and noticed he seemed to be battling some impulse. Sarah, he finally said, would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow? The question caught her completely off guard. I don't know if it's a good idea, Why not? Because you are you, and I am me. David laughed, a low and genuine sound. That's exactly why I think it could be a great idea. Sarah looked at him, at his sincere and hopeful expression, and felt something stir in her chest, something that had nothing to do with the baby's movements. I know a small Italian restaurant 3 blocks from here, she said, before she could change her mind. Nothing fancy. Perfect. What time? 8 in the evening. I'll be there. They waved goodbye, but Sarah could feel his eyes on her back as she walked toward her building. When she arrived at the apartment, Lisa had already left for work, leaving a note on the fridge. Backlight kisses. Sarah sat on the sofa, finally allowing herself to process what had happened. David Anderson, the man who commanded one of the largest business groups in the country, had bought her building, was living in the neighborhood, and had just invited her to dinner. And she had accepted. For the first time in months, Sarah smiled genuinely. Maybe Lisa was right. Maybe things would really work out in the end. Mamma Mia was exactly the kind of place Sarah expected David Anderson to hate. Small, cramped, with tables covered in faded red and white checkered tablecloths, and a handwritten menu taped to the wall with yellowed tape. Giuseppe Benedetti, the owner, was a 65-year-old Italian gentleman who had come to the United States in the 80s with a marinara sauce recipe from his great-grandmother and the dream of opening a little piece of Italy in Brooklyn. Sarah arrived 5 minutes late, breathless after climbing the steep hill that led to the restaurant. She wore a navy blue maternity dress that Lisa had insisted on lending, saying it highlighted her brown eyes. Her hands were sweating inside the small black purse she carried, and she wondered for the 100th time if she had made a huge mistake by accepting that invitation. David was already there, sitting at a table in the most secluded corner of the restaurant, studying the menu with the same concentration he would dedicate to an important financial report. He had swapped his formal suit for dark dress pants, and he wore a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to the elbows, revealing tanned forearms and a discreetly expensive watch. When he saw her enter, he immediately stood up, a gesture of courtesy that made several heads turn in their direction. "You found it," he said, smiling as he pulled out a chair for her to sit. "I thought you might have given up." "Almost," admitted Sarah, settling into the chair with some difficulty. "Lisa spent the whole afternoon convincing me that I was crazy." "And are you?" "Probably." Joseph appeared at the table almost immediately, wiping his hands on a sauce-stained apron and watching David with barely concealed curiosity. "Good evening, Sarah Bella," the Italian greeted her with his heavy accent. "And you must be the boyfriend she talked so much about." Sarah felt her cheeks flush, as red as the tablecloths. "Joseph, I don't—" "Oh, no need to be shy." Joseph laughed heartily, giving David a pat on the shoulder as if they were old friends. "He's a handsome guy. And you, my young man, made an excellent choice. Sarah is a gem, hard-working, with a heart as big as the world." David smiled genuinely, clearly amused by the Italian's exuberance. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Joseph. Sarah told me you make the best Italian food in New York." "Oh, she said that?" Joseph turned to Sarah with a proud smile. "See, I always knew you had good taste. Today I'm making my special gnocchi, the one your sister always orders. And for you, young man, I'll prepare my osso buco, which is a beauty." Before either of them could protest, Joseph had already disappeared into the kitchen, shouting instructions in Italian to someone they couldn't see. Sarah hid her face in her hands, mortified. "He's always like this," she murmured between her fingers. "He can't see a single woman without trying to arrange a marriage." "I don't mind," David said calmly. "In fact, it's comforting." Sarah looked up, surprised. "Comforting?" In the last 15 years, I can't remember meeting a single person who didn't know exactly how much money I had in the bank before talking to me. Joseph treated me like he would any boyfriend of Sarah. "But you're not my boyfriend." "Not yet." The straightforward answer made Sarah's heart skip a beat. She sipped the orange juice that Joseph had automatically brought, trying to buy time to process the comment. "David," she finally said, "I need you to understand one thing. I'm not the type of woman who fits into your world. I don't know how to behave at gala dinners. I don't understand expensive wines. And I definitely don't have the right clothes for the places you go. And I don't know how to make gnocchi. I've never taken a bus in my life, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought happiness was seeing my assets grow 5% each quarter," he replied. "Maybe. That's exactly why we need to get to know each other better." Joseph returned at that moment, carrying a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "Chianti Classico," he announced proudly, "from my hometown to celebrate." "Joseph," Sarah began, "I can't drink." "Oh, of course, La Bambina." Joseph slapped his forehead. "What a fool. I'll bring grape juice for you and for him." He looked at David, waiting for approval. "The wine is perfect," David said. "Thank you." When Joseph walked away again, David leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Tell me about you, about your life before you met me." Sarah hesitated. Her life had nothing glamorous or interesting compared to the economic pages that surely reported his achievements. "There's not much to tell. I've worked at the veterinary clinic since I was 18, first as an assistant, then as a receptionist. I enjoy reading, especially Brazilian novels. On Sundays when I can, I go to the park with Lisa or visit the Brooklyn flea market." "And your dreams? What did you want to be when you were a child?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked about her dreams in years. "I wanted to be a teacher," she said quietly. "In literature. I always imagined having my own classroom, teaching children to love books as much as I do." "Why didn't you follow that path?" "My parents died when I was in my last year of high school. Lisa was only 14. I had to work to support both of us." Sarah shrugged, as if it was something natural. Dreams sometimes have to wait. David studied her in silence for a few moments. "And now, with Emma on the way? Now the dreams are different. I want her to have all the opportunities I didn't have. A good education, books, travel. I want her to believe she can be anything she wants." "And you? Can't you still be anything you want?" Sarah laughed, but there was no joy in the sound. "At 27, pregnant and single, I think my time for dreaming has passed." "I completely disagree." Joseph arrived at that moment with 2 steaming plates, gnocchi with marinara sauce for Sarah and osso buco with risotto for David. The aroma was irresistible, and Sarah realized she hadn't had a decent meal in weeks. "Bene mangiat," Joseph ordered before disappearing again. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Sarah discreetly observed David, noticing how he savored each bite with genuine appreciation. "Are you enjoying it?" she asked. "It's fantastic." Joseph wasn't exaggerating. David wiped his mouth with the napkin and looked at her. "Sarah, can I ask a personal question?" "Sure." "Emma's father, why did he leave the scene?" Sarah stopped eating, her fork suspended in the air. It was the question she had been expecting, but that didn't make it any easier to answer. "His name is Michael," she began slowly. "We dated for 2 years. He worked as a salesman in a cell phone store at the mall. When I found out I was pregnant, he panicked." "Panicked?" "He said he wasn't ready to be a father, that he still had a lot to live. He offered money for me to resolve the situation." Her voice dropped lower. She said she wanted to have the baby. Then he disappeared, changed his number, left his job, vanished. David clenched his fists but kept his voice steady. "I'm really sorry." At first, it hurt a lot. We were thinking about getting married, we had plans. But now, I think Emma and I are better off without him. I don't want my daughter to grow up with a father who sees her as a burden." "She will never be a burden," David said with conviction. "And neither will you." Sarah looked at him in surprise. "You barely know me." "I know enough. I saw how you protected your belly when you nervously entered my office. I saw how you work even when you're uncomfortable. I heard Joseph talk about your character. And I see now how you speak about Emma, with unconditional love, even knowing that raising a child alone will be difficult." His words touched something deep within Sarah, something she had kept protected for months. She felt her eyes welling up. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping her tears with a napkin. "Pregnancy hormones. Don't apologize. It's beautiful to see someone who feels things deeply." "And you? Do you feel things deeply?" David fell silent for a long moment, swirling the wineglass between his fingers. "Until recently, I would say no. I spent the last 15 years building walls around any feelings that could make me vulnerable. My father died of a heart attack at 42, stress, overwork. I swore I would be different from him. And did you succeed? I managed to be financially successful, but I became just like him in every other way. A workaholic, unable to form real connections, always putting business first. What changed?" David looked her directly in the eyes. "You. A pregnant woman crying in my office made me realize I was wasting my life." Sarah felt her cheeks heat up again. "That's a lot of responsibility to place on someone you met 3 weeks ago." "It's not responsibility, it's inspiration." Joseph appeared again, this time carrying a small bowl of gelato. "Dessert for the beautiful mama," he announced, placing the treat in front of Sarah. "Pistachio from Sicily, good for the baby." "Joseph, I can't accept all this for free," Sarah protested. "Who says free?" Joseph laughed heartily. "Your boyfriend already paid the bill, and he paid it very well." Sarah turned to David, indignant. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he interrupted simply. After dessert, they left the restaurant for a slow walk through the illuminated streets of Brooklyn. The night was cool, typical of autumn in New York, and Sarah pulled the coat tighter around her shoulders. "Are you cold?" David asked, taking off his own blazer. "I'm fine." Even so, he draped the blazer over her shoulders. The piece smelled of his cologne, something woody and sophisticated that was completely different from any fragrance she knew. They walked in silence for a few blocks, passing bars with live music spilling out of open doors, couples sharing benches in the park, groups of friends laughing loudly on the sidewalks. It was a side of New York that David clearly didn't know well, more human, warmer, less concerned with status and money. "I like it here," he said when they stopped in front of Sarah's building. "It's different from what you're used to." "It is, but maybe it's time for me to get used to different things." They stood at the entrance of the building, neither wanting to end the night. Sarah knew she should go upstairs, that it was late and she needed to rest, but something kept her there. "David," she finally said, "I need you to understand that I can't afford to get hurt. Not now. Not with Emma on the way." "I know. And you need to understand that this, us, might not work. We're from very different worlds. All relationships have risks, Sarah. The difference is that some risks are worth taking." "And you think I'm worth it?" David took a step toward her, getting so close that she could feel the warmth of his body. "I think you might be the best decision I've ever made in my life." Before she could respond, he leaned down and gently kissed her forehead, a gesture so tender that it made her heart race. "Good night, Sarah." "Good night." She watched him walk toward the end of the street where she knew he had left his car. When she got to the apartment, Lisa still hadn't returned from work. Sarah slowly changed, carefully putting David's blazer away in the closet. Lying in bed with her hand resting on her belly where Emma was gently moving, Sarah allowed herself to imagine, for the first time in months, that maybe her story could have a different ending than she had planned. An ending where she wouldn't be alone, where her daughter would have a father who loved her, where her own dreams could still come true. It was dangerous to dream like this, she knew, but for the first time in a long time, the danger seemed worth it. May arrived with torrential rains that turned New York into a maze of flooded streets and chaotic traffic. Sarah was in her 37th week of pregnancy, and each day became more challenging. Her legs were swelling so much that she could barely fit into her shoes, and back pain woke her several times during the night. Dr. Smith had insisted that she take a complete break from work, worried about her dangerously fluctuating blood pressure. "Sarah, you need absolute rest," the obstetrician had said at the previous week's appointment. A middle-aged man with small glasses and a perpetually worried expression. No stairs, no heavy lifting, and most importantly, no stress. Easier said than done. With the income from the veterinary clinic cut off, Sarah was relying solely on the few dollars Lisa could bring in from the diner, and that was when her sister didn't spend half her salary on clothes or outings with her latest boyfriend. The electricity bill of the previous month had come with late fees, and the water bill was threatening the same fate. It was Thursday night, when the most violent storm of the month hit the city. Sarah was alone in the apartment. Lisa had gone out on a date with Michael, a guy she had met the week before, who promised to be different from all the others. Lightning illuminated the sky with alarming frequency, and the strong wind made the windows rattle in their old, poorly sealed frames. Sarah was trying to relax on the sofa, watching an old romantic comedy on TV, when she felt a strange pain in her lower back. It wasn't like the usual pains of pregnancy. It was more intense, more persistent. She shifted positions several times, trying to find relief, but the sensation only worsened. It was when she got up to go to the bathroom that she slipped. The sole of her rubber flip-flops couldn't get enough grip on the wet floor from the rain coming through the poorly closed window of the living room. Sarah felt the world spin in slow motion as she lost her balance, her hands instinctively flying to protect her belly as her body leaned dangerously toward the ground. It was then that strong arms caught her, preventing a fall. That could have been disastrous. "Careful," said a familiar and concerned voice. Sarah looked up, still dizzy from the shock, and found David Anderson. He was soaked from the rain, his hair plastered to his forehead, his white shirt clinging to his chest. His grey-blue eyes reflected a worry she had never seen before. "David, how are you? What are you doing here?" she asked, still in his arms, her heart racing from both the scare and the closeness. "I live upstairs," he said, helping her to stand with extreme care. "I heard a noise like someone had fallen." "Upstairs?" Sarah stared at him, confused. "But upstairs is where Ms. Thompson lives, the retired teacher." David looked away, clearly uncomfortable. "Ms. Thompson moved to a better apartment in the Upper West Side." The reality hit Sarah like a punch. "You bought her apartment too." "Sarah, how long have you literally been living above me?" Her voice was rising, a mix of disbelief and indignation taking over her. 3 weeks. 3 weeks? Sarah stepped away from him, awkwardly walking to the wet window. "Did you buy the whole building to spy on me?" "It's not spying. I wanted to be around, in case you needed anything." "Around?" Sarah turned to face him, her eyes shining with anger. "David, that's sick. You can't just buy people's lives." "That's not how it happened," he said, taking a cautious step toward her. "When I found out you were having financial difficulties—" "How did you know? Who told you?" Tears began to mix with her anger. "Was it Ms. Johnson? Did you pay her to watch me too?" "Sarah, please let me explain." "No! She raised her hands, creating a physical barrier between them. "This is humiliating. You made me feel special, like there was something real between us, when in fact it was just you playing God with the life of a desperate woman." "That's not true," David said, his own voice rising. "What I feel for you is real, more real than anything I've ever experienced." "How can I believe you? How can I trust someone who lies about where they live, who buys entire buildings just to control my life?" A particularly strong lightning bolt illuminated the apartment at that moment, followed by a thunderclap that made the walls shake. The light flickered once and then went out completely, leaving them in total darkness. "Damn," David murmured. Sarah laughed bitterly in the dark. "Perfect. Now even nature is conspiring." She tried to walk toward what she thought was the kitchen, where she kept some candles, but bumped into the coffee table, letting out a small scream of pain and fright. "Sarah!" David reached her immediately, his hands finding her shoulders in the dark. "Are you okay? Did you hurt anything?" I'm fine," she replied, but her voice trembled. "I just need to find the candles." "Where are they?" "In the kitchen, first drawer to the right of the sink." David disappeared into the darkness, and Sarah heard the sound of drawers being opened and closed. The apartment was colder now, and she felt chills run through her body. The back pain had returned, more intense than before. "I found them," David said, and a few seconds later, a soft candlelight illuminated the space. He had found 3 candles and strategically placed them around the room. The golden dancing light created shadows on the walls, transforming the simple apartment into something almost magical. But Sarah was beyond appreciating the beauty of the moment. "You need to go," she said, hugging herself, "to keep warm." "I'm not leaving you alone in the dark, pregnant and during a storm," David replied firmly. "It's not your responsibility to take care of me. Maybe it's not my responsibility, but it's my choice." The intensity in his voice silenced her momentarily. David ran his hands through his wet hair, clearly struggling to find the right words. "Sarah," he finally said, his voice lower, more vulnerable, "you're right. What I did was invasive and manipulative. I bought this building because I couldn't stand the thought of you going without when I had the resources to help. But you didn't give me a choice. Because I knew you wouldn't accept direct help. You're too proud, too independent. And that gives you the right to make decisions for me." David sighed, walking to the window where the rain continued to pound heavily. No, it doesn't, and I apologize." The silence that followed was filled only by the sound of the storm outside and the dancing light of the candles. Sarah sat heavily on the sofa, feeling the weight of the argument and the pregnancy pressing down on her shoulders. "David," she said softly, "I need you to understand one thing about... I spent my whole life being abandoned by the people who were supposed to protect me. My parents died and left me alone to take care of Lisa. Emma's father abandoned me when I needed him the most. I learned that the only person I can trust is myself." David turned to look at her, his profile illuminated by the nearest candlelight. "And then you show up," Marina continued, "with all your money and power, making decisions about my life without consulting me. How can I not see this as just another form of abandonment? Because when you get tired of playing the savior, you'll leave too. I'm not going anywhere." "How can I be sure?" David walked over to her and knelt beside the sofa, meeting her gaze. "Because I've never had anything worth staying for." The tears Marina had been holding back finally escaped. "That's not enough, David. Pretty promises don't pay bills or raise children." "Then let me prove it." "How?" "Give me a chance to do this right. No lies, no manipulation. Just let me be here for both of you." Marina studied him in the golden candlelight. His steel-grey eyes were pleading, vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. There was sincerity there, but there was also pain, a deep pain she recognized because she carried a similar one. "You said your father died when you were 15, she said softly. David nodded, surprised by the change of subject. "What was he like?" David fell silent for a long moment before answering. "He was a workaholic. Left home at 5 in the morning, came back after midnight. Weekends were just other work days. My mother begged him to slow down, but he said he was building a future for our family." "And was he?" "Financially, yes. Emotionally." David shook his head. "I barely knew him. When he died, I realized I had lost a stranger who just happened to live in the same house as me. And you became just like him. Worse. At least he had a family he was working for. I only had numbers on spreadsheets." Marina reached out and gently touched his face. "Is that why you're doing all this? Trying to be different from him?" "Partly, but mainly because when I look at you, when I think about Emma, I feel something I've never felt before. I feel like I finally understand what life is for." A new pain in Marina's back hit her at that moment, stronger than all the previous ones. She instinctively bent over, bringing her hand to her lower back. "Marina, what's wrong?" David immediately stood up, alarmed. "I don't know," she said through clenched teeth. "Back pain, stronger than usual." "How long?" "It started before you got here. I thought it was normal, but..." Another pain hit her, this time radiating from her lower back to the front of her abdomen. Marina let out a low groan, her hands flying. "To her belly." "Those are contractions," David said, his voice tinged with concern. "They can't be. There's still 3 weeks to go." "Marina, we need to go to the hospital, now. The storm, the lights. How are we going to get out of here?" David was already in motion, grabbing her coat and searching for the keys. "My car is in the garage. It has its own generator." "David, Another contraction, stronger than the previous ones, cut off her sentence. This time, Marina couldn't hold back the scream. "Let's go," David said carefully but urgently, picking her up. "Right. Now." As he carried her down the stairs in the dark, illuminating the way with his phone light, Marina clung to his neck. All the fights, all the hurts and distrust seemed secondary to the reality that Emma was coming early and that David was there when she needed him the most. "It's going to be okay," he murmured as he settled her into the back seat of his car. "I promise it will be okay." As the car cut through the flooded streets of New York toward the hospital, Marina closed her eyes and allowed herself to believe, for the first time, that maybe she wasn't facing everything alone. The general hospital was in chaos when David burst through the emergency door carrying Marina in his arms. The maternity ward operated 24 hours, but the storm had overloaded the electrical system, and only half the lights were working. Nurses were running back and forth with flashlights, and the sound of emergency generators created a constant hum in the air. "Help! She's in premature labor!" David shouted to the first nurse he saw, a robust, middle-aged woman with grey hair tied in a tight bun. "How many weeks?" the nurse asked, already pushing a stretcher toward them. 37, Marina replied between contractions, her nails digging into David's arm. "The contractions started an hour ago." "Dr. Johnson," the nurse called out, "premature birth coming." The doctor who appeared was a young man, perhaps in his early 30s, wearing dark glasses and an eternally calm expression that inspired confidence. Dr. Johnson had specialized in high-risk births after losing his own wife to an obstetric complication years before, a tragedy that had turned him into one of the best obstetricians in the city. "Good evening, I'm Dr. Johnson," he said, walking alongside the stretcher as they took Marina to the evaluation room. "Let's see how you and your baby are doing." "She's not my usual patient," Marina panted. "My doctor is Dr. Smith, but Don't worry, I'll take good care of both of you, Dr. Johnson gently interrupted. Are you the father? David hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. Yes. Marina looked at him in surprise, but another contraction prevented her from questioning his response. The pains were becoming more frequent and intense, coming every 3 minutes. In the examination room, as Dr. Johnson conducted the initial assessment, David stayed by Marina's side, holding her hand. Sarah held David's hand. Their palms were sweaty. She didn't know if it was her nervousness or his. Well, said the doctor after a few minutes, you will meet your daughter today. The cervix is already 5 centimeters dilated, and the contractions are regular. At 37 weeks, she is practically fully formed, but we will monitor everything closely. Is she going to be okay? David asked, his voice more tense than he intended to show. The vital signs are good, both for the mother and the baby, but premature births always require extra care. Dr. Johnson turned to Sarah. Do you have a history of complications during pregnancy? High blood pressure in the last few weeks, Sarah replied, and a lot of stress. We're going to transfer you to the delivery suite. The neonatal team has already been notified and will be present to examine the baby as soon as she is born. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of emotions. Sarah was taken to a private delivery suite. David had insisted on paying for special accommodations, and this time she didn't have the energy to protest. The room was spacious, with soft lighting and a view of the hospital garden that would normally be relaxing, if it weren't for the storm still raging outside. Lisa arrived at the hospital around midnight, drenched and frantic. Michael had taken her on his motorcycle, and the two looked like they had stepped out of a disaster movie. Hair plastered to their heads, clothes dripping water onto the corridor floor. "Sarah, how are you? Is the baby okay?" Lisa burst into the room like a hurricane, her eyes red with worry. "I'm fine," Sarah said between a contraction and the breathing. Techniques she had learned in the prenatal class. Emma is in a hurry to meet the world. Lisa looked at David, who hadn't left Sarah's side for a minute. "And you? Why are you here?" "He brought me to the hospital," Sarah explained quickly. "If it weren't for him—" "Oh." Lisa processed the information, clearly surprised. "Thank you," she said to David, her usual hostility replaced by genuine gratitude. "There's no need to thank me," he replied. Dr. Johnson entered the room at that moment, checking the fetal monitor and examining Sarah again. "How are you feeling? Are the contractions closer together?" "Every 2 minutes now," Sarah replied, sweat covering her forehead despite the air conditioning. "Perfect. I think in about an hour we'll have our little one here." It was during this last hour that everything changed between David and Sarah. The social masks, class differences and distrust all disappeared in the intensity of the moment. David held her hand during each contraction, whispering words of encouragement when she thought she couldn't go on, and wiping her sweat with a gentleness that contrasted with his public image as a ruthless CEO. "I can't do this anymore," Sarah murmured, during a particularly strong contraction. "It hurts too much." "You can," David said, kissing her forehead. "You are the strongest woman I know. Emma needs you right now." "I'm scared." "So am I. But we're in this together." Lisa watched their interaction with growing surprise. This was not the cold, calculating man she had imagined when Sarah told her about the CEO who had invaded her life. This was a passionate, caring man, completely vulnerable at the thought of losing something precious. At 3:47 a.m., with the storm finally diminishing in intensity, Emma Johnson entered the world. "She's here," announced Dr. Johnson, holding the tiny but perfect child. "A beautiful and healthy girl." Emma's first cry echoed through the room like heavenly music. Sarah broke down in tears of relief, while David stood frozen, watching the child who had changed his life even before she was born. "She's perfect," he murmured, his own tears mingling with Sarah's. "Do you want to cut the umbilical cord, Dad?" Dr. Johnson asked, offering the surgical scissors to David. David looked at Sarah, seeking permission. She nodded through her tears, and he accepted the scissors with trembling hands. The moment he cut the umbilical cord marked not just Emma's birth, but the birth of a family that neither of them had planned, but somehow felt inevitable. Emma weighed 6.2 pounds and measured 18.5 inches, small for her gestational age, but within normal parameters. The neonatal team conducted a quick assessment and declared her healthy, needing only observation in the first hours due to her premature birth. "Can I hold her?" Sarah asked, extending her arms. The nurse placed Emma on Sarah's chest, and the world seemed to stop. The baby had dark, fine hair, rosy skin, and tiny clenched fists. Her eyes opened, for a moment revealing a deep blue that would surely change color in the coming weeks. "Hi, my princess," Sarah whispered, kissing the tiny forehead. "I can finally meet you." Emma immediately calmed down upon hearing her mother's voice, her movements becoming softer and more relaxed. It was clear she recognized the voice that had lulled her for 9 months. "Can I?" David asked hesitantly, extending a finger toward Emma's hand. When his finger touched the baby's palm, Emma instinctively grasped it, her tiny fingers wrapping around his large, masculine finger with surprising strength. "She knows you," Lisa said, softly watching the scene with tears in her eyes. David remained silent, completely captivated by the sensation of the tiny fingers holding onto his. In that moment, all his business successes, all his financial achievements seemed insignificant compared to this simple and pure touch. "She's ours," he said to Sarah, his voice filled with wonder and love. "Ours," Sarah repeated, and for the first time since she met him, she didn't question his assumption. Because looking at Emma, seeing how she reacted to David's presence, Sarah realized that her daughter had been born not just from her, but also from him in some inexplicable and wonderful way. The next few hours were a blend of pure happiness and extreme exhaustion. Emma was taken to... The nursery for observation was set up, but they brought a special chair to the room where Sarah rested, allowing the baby to stay close to her mother. David refused to leave the hospital, uncomfortably sleeping in an armchair next to the bed. "You don't have to stay," Sarah said when she woke up the next morning and found him watching Emma sleep in the crib. "I want to stay," he simply replied. "David, about last night, the argument—" "Forget it," he interrupted. "None of that matters now." "It does matter. You were right about one thing. I'm too proud to accept help. But last night you saved me. You saved both of us." David turned to look at her. "And you saved me too." "How?" "You gave me something to live for. Something real." Sarah extended her hand, and he took it without hesitation. "Can we try to do this right this time? No lies, no manipulation." "We can start slow," David agreed. "No pressure, no unrealistic expectations. Just seeing what happens." Seeing what happens. Emma chose that exact moment to wake up, her eyes opening and searching for familiar faces. When she saw Sarah and David leaning over her crib, she did something that doctors would say is impossible for a newborn. She smiled. "She smiled," Sarah said, amazed. "It's a reflex," David said, but he was smiling too. "It doesn't matter. It's our first smile from her." And so, as the sun finally broke through the storm clouds outside, illuminating the hospital room with warm, golden light, an improvised but genuine family took their first steps together. It wouldn't be easy. They had many differences to resolve, many barriers to overcome. But looking at Emma, they both knew they had something worth fighting for. Love had arrived in the most unexpected way possible, through a wrong door that led them exactly where they were meant to be. The first 3 months of Emma's life transformed everyone's routine in a way that no parenting manual could have prepared Sarah for. The baby was healthy but demanding, waking every 2 hours to feed, crying inexplicably during the nights, and only calming down when she heard certain voices or felt specific touches. To everyone's surprise, one of those voices was David's. The apartment in Brooklyn had become too small for 3 women and now a baby. Lisa, who had initially been delighted with her niece, began to show signs of fatigue from sleepless nights and lack of privacy. Michael, her current boyfriend, constantly complained about the noise and the inability to have intimate moments. "Sarah, we need to talk," Lisa said one August morning while making coffee in the cramped kitchen. Her dark circles were deep, and she wore the wrinkled uniform from the diner where she worked. "This isn't working." Sarah was sitting in the armchair in the living room, breastfeeding Emma while trying to read a book that David had brought, a classic by a well-known author. It was part of his promise to help her resume her studies, something he had been gently encouraging over the past few weeks. "What isn't working?" Sarah asked, although she suspected what the answer would be. "Sis, I love Emma. You know that. But I'm 23, I work at night, and I need to rest during the day. And Michael—" "Michael can go to hell," Sarah interrupted, her voice harsher than she intended. "It's not just because of him. It's because of me, too. I feel like an intruder in my own home." Sarah sighed, adjusting Emma at her breast. The baby was nursing intently, her tiny fists gripping her mother's shirt. "And what do you want me to do, Lisa? I don't have money to rent another place, and with Emma so small." "David offered for you to move into his apartment," Lisa said, avoiding her sister's gaze. "He what?" Sarah almost shouted, making Emma startle and unlatch. "Calm down, sis. Don't shout near the baby." Lisa moved closer, sitting on the edge of the sofa. "He talked to me yesterday when you were sleeping. He said his apartment has 3 bedrooms, that Emma would have her own crib, that you would have more space." "And what did you say?" "I said I would talk to you." "But Sarah—" Lisa took her sister's hand. "Maybe it's a good idea." "It's a terrible idea." Sarah stood up, placing Emma on her shoulder to burp her. "Lisa, I barely know this man. Yes, he was wonderful during Emma's birth, but living with him, that's crazy." "Why is it crazy? You clearly like each other." "He adores Emma." "Because relationships that start with financial dependency don't end well," Sarah said, pacing nervously in the small living room. "I've lived that. I've depended on a man who promised to take care of me. Remember how that ended?" "David isn't Michael." "No, it's worse. Michael was a cell phone salesman. David is a billionaire. If things go wrong with him, the consequences will be much greater." Lisa was silent for a few moments, watching her sister pace back and forth with Emma in her arms. "Sis, can I ask you something? Do you like him?" Sarah stopped. "Walking." "That doesn't matter." "It does matter. Do you like him?" Sarah sat heavily in the armchair, Emma peacefully falling asleep in her arms. "I don't know. Sometimes when he holds Emma and talks to her in that soft voice, or when he brings me books because he remembers I wanted to study literature, I think maybe... But then I remember who he is, where he comes from, and I realize how different we are." "Different how?" "Lisa, this man has more money than most people will see in their entire lives. He has employees, a chauffeur, homes in other countries. I'm an unemployed receptionist with a high school diploma. What can we have in common besides Emma? Maybe you'll figure that out living together." The conversation was interrupted by David's arrival, who had developed the habit of showing up every as late afternoon days, always carried something. Diapers, powdered milk, educational toys that Emma was still too young to use, or simply flowers to brighten the environment. "Good afternoon," he greeted, kissing Sarah's forehead and then Emma's. It was a ritual that had naturally established itself, without either of them stopping to analyze its significance. "Hi," Sarah replied, noticing that Lisa was watching the interaction with renewed interest. "How was your day?" David sat on the floor next to the armchair, extending his finger so that Emma, now awake, could grasp it. "David," Sarah said, deciding to confront the issue directly, "Lisa told me about your suggestion." "Oh." David avoided her gaze for a moment. "And what did you think?" "I think you should have talked to me first." "You're right. I'm sorry." He looked directly at her. "But Sarah, the offer is serious. You both need more space, and I have plenty of it." "It's not about space, David." "Then what is it about?" Sarah looked at Lisa, who gestured that she would step out to give them privacy. Once they were alone, Sarah took a deep breath before responding. "It's about independence. It's about not becoming dependent on you in a way that would make it impossible to maintain my dignity if things don't work out between us." David was silent for a long moment, absent-mindedly playing with Emma's fingers. "And what if I said I don't intend for things to go wrong? No one plans for things to go wrong, David, but they do. Not always. In my experience, always." David stood up and walked to the window, watching the movement of the street below. "Sarah, can I tell you something about my family?" "Sure." "My parents married for convenience. My mother came from a traditional but broke family. My father was a nouveau riche seeking social status. They lived together for 20 years without ever truly loving each other. And then I grew up thinking that relationships were just business transactions. Sex for security, companionship for status, children for the continuity of the legacy." He turned to look at her. "Until I met you." "David, let me finish. When I look at you with Emma, when I see how you both love each other unconditionally, I understand what I've always missed. I don't want you to move into my house because you need my help. I want it because I want to be part of your family." His words touched something deep in Sarah, but she forced herself to maintain her rationality. "And what if we find out that we don't work well together? What if you realize that having an instant family isn't what you expected? What happens to us? Then we'll talk like adults and find a solution that works for everyone, especially for Emma." It's easy to say that now, but Emma chose that moment to start crying. Not the cry of hunger or sleep, but the inconsolable cry that had become familiar in recent weeks. Sarah tried to calm her by walking, humming, offering a pacifier, but nothing worked. "Can I try?" David asked. Sarah hesitated, but then handed the baby over to him. David took Emma with the confidence he had developed over the months, holding her against his chest and murmuring softly, "Hey, princess. Why? Are you crying? Daddy is here." The words, "Daddy is here," hit Sarah like a bolt of lightning. David had said it without thinking, but clearly that was how he saw himself, as Emma's father. And the most surprising thing was that Emma immediately calmed down, her cries diminishing to small whimpers. "How do you do that?" Sarah asked, watching their interaction. "I don't know. Maybe she senses that I'm calm. Or maybe she senses that you truly love her." David looked at Sarah over Emma's head. "I do. I love both of you. More than I thought it was possible to love." The silence that followed was filled only by Emma's peaceful breathing, who had fallen asleep on David's chest. Sarah watched the scene, the most powerful man she knew, cradling her daughter with the tenderness of someone holding the greatest treasure in the world. "1 month, she finally said. "What?" "We can try for 1 month, but with rules." "What kind of rules?" First, I pay my share of the expenses. I don't know how, but I'll figure it out. Sarah, that's ridiculous. I have resources. That's rule number one. Either we accept that I'm an equal in this relationship or it won't work. David nodded reluctantly. And the other rules? Second, Emma and I have our own room. We don't sleep together until I decide I'm ready. I agree. Third, if either of us wants to end the arrangement, we have 2 weeks to find a new place for me and Emma. No drama. That's not going to be necessary. Maybe not, but it's the rule. David walked over to her, still holding Emma asleep in his arms. And if at the end of this month we find out that we work well together, what happens then? Then we see what happens. All right, a month trial. He smiled, that rare smile that completely transformed his expression. When do you want to move? Next weekend. But David? Yes? If you disappoint me, if you hurt Emma in any way, I will disappear with her, and you will never see us again. Understood? Understood. And Sarah? Yes? I won't disappoint you. I promise. As she watched David carefully return Emma to her arms, Sarah wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life or making the best decision. Only time would tell. But looking at her daughter, who was peacefully asleep after being calmed by the man she had begun to call Daddy, Sarah felt a pang of hope that she hadn't experienced in a long time. Maybe, just maybe, this makeshift family could really work. David's apartment in Brooklyn was everything Sarah had imagined it would be, and at the same time, completely different. It occupied the entire floor of a modern building by the East River. With a panoramic view of the river and the city, the spaces were spacious, decorated with Italian designer furniture and artworks that she suspected were worth more than her entire house in Brooklyn. But what surprised her was the coldness of the place. It felt more like a magazine showroom than a home. "It's impressive," said Sarah, holding Emma in her arms as she looked at the living room with its double-height ceiling and an entire wall of glass. "It's too big," replied David, looking almost embarrassed. "I bought it when the company was growing rapidly. I needed something that would impress clients and investors." "And it does impress. But it's not cozy. I never minded that before, but now," he gestured vaguely, "maybe you can help make it more human." Mr. Thompson, David's chauffeur, had brought Sarah's few belongings in his luxury sedan: 2 suitcases of clothes, some books, Emma's portable crib, and a box of toys and diapers. Seeing everything spread out in the entrance hall of the luxury apartment, Sarah felt a pang of inadequacy. "Your bedroom is this way," David said, guiding them down a long corridor. "It has an ensuite bathroom and a beautiful view of the park." The bedroom was larger than the living room of her old apartment, with a king-size bed, spacious closet, and a nursing chair that had clearly been bought specifically for her. Next door, a door connected to a smaller second room that had been transformed into a nursery. "When did you have time to do this?" Sarah asked, observing the nursery decorated in soft shades of yellow and white, with mobiles, stuffed animals, and even a rocking chair strategically placed by the window. "Some people came over during the past week," David said, looking nervous. "If you don't like something, we can change it." Sarah entered the nursery in silence. There was a care in the details that went beyond money. The height of the changing table was perfect for her. The curtains blocked the light, but allowed fresh air in, and there was even a small library with classic children's books. "It's perfect," she finally said, and saw David's shoulders visibly relax. The first weeks of living together were like a delicate dance between 2 strangers, learning each other's steps. David left for work at 7 in the morning and returned at 6 in the evening, a much more humane schedule than Sarah had expected. He had hired a housekeeper, Miss Johnson, a 50-year-old woman with experience in childcare, to help during the day. You didn't have to, Sarah protested on the first day. It's not for you, David explained. It's for me. I want you two to be rested and energized to put up with me when I get home. Ms. Johnson proved to be a blessing. Experienced and caring, she took on the household tasks and helped with Emma when Sarah needed to rest. More importantly, she didn't judge the unconventional family arrangement. Any configuration that resulted in love and care for a child was valid to her. "This little one needed a family," Miss Johnson commented one morning while preparing smoothies for Sarah and watching David play with Emma on the living room rug. "In 10 years working for him, I've never seen him so happy." 10 years? Since he bought this apartment. Always very polite, always paid on time, but never smiled. Lived only to work. Miss Johnson shook her head. "Until you two arrived." Sarah watched David on the floor, making faces at Emma, who responded with delighted giggles. It was hard to reconcile this version of him, relaxed, playful, completely devoted to the whims of a baby, with the intimidating man she had met at the office months ago. "Ms. Johnson," Sarah said hesitantly, "has he brought other women here?" "A few, over the years, but they never stayed overnight, never left belongings, and he never changed his routine for any of them." The woman paused, choosing her words. "With you, it's different. He came home yesterday talking about changing the living room furniture for something more suitable for a child, installed safety locks on all the cabinets. A man doesn't do that for just anyone." The evenings were the most intimate moments between Sarah and David. After Emma fell asleep, they would meet in the living room, usually with him reading reports and her studying for the GED she had decided to complete. Sometimes they talked about their day. Other times they remained in comfortable silence, each immersed in their activities. "Sarah," David said one of those nights, closing his laptop and turning to her on the sofa, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why didn't you finish high school? You clearly have the intelligence for it." Sarah marked the page of the history book she was reading. "When my parents died, I was in my last year. Carla needed care, and I needed to work. I couldn't juggle all three things. And now, what do you plan to do after the GED?" "I don't know, maybe work again when Emma is older, or perhaps take a technical course." "And college? Your dream of being a teacher?" Sarah laughed, but without humor. "David, college costs money, a lot of money. And even if I got a scholarship, that's 4 years without being able to work full-time. How would I support Emma? What if money wasn't an issue? It's always an issue when you don't have it." David was silent for a few moments. "Sarah, can I suggest something without you taking offense?" "Depends on the suggestion. How about you take the college entrance exam for English at City University? It's a public university, good quality. I could help with the costs of materials, transportation." "David, no." "Why not?" "Because I'm already living in your house, eating your food, using your housekeeper. If I accept you paying for my studies too, I'll become completely dependent on you. Or you'll become the teacher you've always wanted to be. And what if we break up? What if you get tired of playing family and I'm in the middle of a course that I can't afford, on my own?" David shifted on the sofa, facing her. "Sarah, you need to stop planning our separation. We've been together for 2 months. It's going well. Why not focus on what's working instead of preparing for what might go wrong? Because that's how I protect Emma and myself. And what if I told you that I want you to study, not because I want to control your life, but because I want you to be happy, because I want our daughter to have a mother who is professionally fulfilled." The word "our" did not go unnoticed, but Sarah decided not to comment. "Even so, I can't accept." "Then how about a compromise?" "What kind of compromise?" "You take the college entrance exam. If you pass, we consider the options. Maybe you can get a scholarship or a student loan. If you need additional help, we can talk about it then." Sarah considered the proposal. The truth was that she missed studying, the feeling of growing intellectually, and the idea of one day being in a classroom teaching literature to teenagers still made her heart race. "Can I think about it?" Of course. They returned to their activities, but Sarah couldn't concentrate on the book. Her mind was filled with possibilities she had buried years ago: degrees, a career, real financial independence. Would it be possible to balance motherhood, a relationship, and professional fulfillment? It was Emma who provided the answer, waking from the crib with cries indicating hunger. As Sarah breastfed her in the nursery chair, watching the city lights through the window of the city that never sleeps, she had an epiphany. Maybe it was time to stop being afraid of the future and start actively building it. Maybe David was right. It was time to focus on what was going well. "Emma," she murmured to the peacefully nursing baby, "what do you think about Mommy going back to school? Would you bring me luck on the exam?" Emma paused, nursing for a moment, looking at Sarah with her big dark eyes, and then resumed nursing with even more vigor, as if to say, "Of course, Mommy, we can do anything together." The next day, Sarah woke up with a determination she hadn't felt in years. During breakfast, while David read the newspaper and Emma played in her high chair, she announced her decision. "I want to take the college entrance exam." David looked up from the newspaper, smiling. "Are you sure?" "I am, but keeping our rule, I pay my share. I'll work part-time when Emma is older, save money and manage." "What if I wanted to help?" "Then we can talk about it, like a real couple talks about the future of the family." The word couple hung in the air between them. It was the first time Sarah referred to them this way, and both felt the weight of the declaration. "We are a real couple," David said softly. "We're learning to be," Sarah corrected, "but yes, I think we are." Emma chose that moment to throw a piece of banana in David's direction, hitting his expensive tie squarely. Instead of getting annoyed, he laughed loudly, a genuine and spontaneous sound that Sarah rarely heard. "I think she approves of our conversation," he said, wiping the banana off his tie, "or she's saying it's time for you to go to work." Probably both. That night, after Emma fell asleep, David and Sarah sat on the balcony of the apartment, watching the city lights and planning for the future for the first time as a true couple. There were still many uncertainties, many differences to resolve, but for the first time since they met, both were looking forward instead of shielding themselves from the past. It was a beginning, and sometimes, Sarah thought as she nestled into David's shoulder, a beginning was all a family needed. The first major storm of the season came into Sarah and David's life not through time, but through a phone call on a September morning. Sarah was bathing Emma, enjoying the happy coos of the 4-month-old baby, when the intercom buzzed insistently. Ms. Johnson answered and, a few minutes later, appeared at the bathroom door with a worried expression. "Sarah, there's a visitor for you. A lady who says she's your mother." Sarah's hands froze in the warm water where Emma was playing. "My mother?" "That's what she said. She's waiting in the living room." Sarah felt as if the ground had opened beneath her feet. Her mother, Ms. Johnson, had abandoned her and Carla when Sarah was 15, simply disappearing one morning without explanation or goodbye. 2 years later, when her paternal grandparents died in a car accident, Sarah had desperately tried to find her, but it was as if Ms. Johnson had evaporated from the face of the earth. Can you hold Emma?" Sarah asked, her hands trembling as she lifted the baby from the tub. Ms. Johnson carefully took Emma, wrapping her in a fluffy towel. "Do you want me to call Dr. David?" "No, not yet." Sarah quickly put on a robe, trying to control her breathing. "Can you watch her for a few minutes? I need to see what this woman wants." Miss Johnson was standing in the living room, gazing at the panoramic view of the city. At 48, she still retained the beauty Sarah remembered from childhood, but there was a hardness in her face that hadn't existed before. She wore expensive but tasteless clothes, overly flashy jewelry, and there was a strong scent of French perfume that filled the room. "Sarah," she said when she saw her daughter enter the room, "you've grown so much. You're a beautiful woman." "Ms. Johnson," Sarah kept her distance, crossing her arms defensively. "I didn't think I'd see you again." "I know you must be surprised." "Surprised?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "You abandoned 2 minor daughters, disappear for 12 years without a word, and you think I'm just surprised." Miss Johnson sighed, sitting on the Italian sofa as if it were her home. "Things were complicated back then, Sarah. Your father and we had problems. I needed finding my way. Our father died when I was 17. Did you know that?" "I did. I read it in the newspaper." "You read it in the newspaper?" Sarah repeated the words slowly, letting their cruelty echo in the air. "And didn't you think your daughters might need their mother during the funeral, during the difficult months that followed?" "Sarah, please." "Where were you when Lisa had nightmares every night for a year? Where were you when I had to drop out of school to work? Where were you when I cried every night because I didn't know how to raise a teenager while I was still just a teenager myself?" Miss Johnson fell silent, nervously fiddling with the jewelry around her neck. "I was rebuilding my life. I remarried, moved to the countryside. I had other children." The words hit Sarah like a slap. "Other children? 2. A boy and a girl. And did you manage to raise them? Or did you abandon them too?" "I didn't abandon anyone else," Miss Johnson said defensively. "I learned from my mistakes." "Good for them." Sarah walked to the window, trying to control the anger rising in her chest. "What do you want, Miss Johnson? Why did you show up now?" "I heard you had a daughter. I saw it on social media. Lisa posts pictures sometimes." Sarah turned abruptly. "You've been following our lives on social media?" "Just curiosity. I wanted to see how you were doing." "Curiosity?" Sarah shook her head, incredulous. 12 years of curiosity, but never enough to make a phone, call, or send a letter. "Sarah, I know you're hurt." "Hurt?" Sarah laughed, but the sound was harsh. "I spent years thinking I had done something wrong, that I had been a terrible daughter for you to abandon me. I went to therapy to understand why my own mother preferred life without me. It wasn't about you. It was about me, and about Lisa. You chose your freedom over your responsibilities, and now what do you want? Forgiveness, a second chance, to meet your granddaughter." Miss Johnson stood up from the sofa, walking towards Sarah. "I want to be part of your lives again. I want to meet my granddaughter. I want to make up for lost time. Lost time cannot be regained." Sarah's voice was cold, more controlled. "Sophia doesn't need a grandmother who appears and disappears at her convenience." "I've changed, Sarah. I'm more mature now, more stable. Until the next time you decide you need to find your way." It was at that moment that David arrived home from work, entering the apartment at his usual time. He stopped at the living room door, immediately assessing the tension in the air. "Sarah, are you okay?" His voice was alert, protective. "David, this is Miss Johnson, my mother." The sarcasm in the word mother did not go unnoticed. David approached, extending his hand politely but without warmth. "Nice to meet you." Miss Johnson studied David with obvious interest, the expensive suit, the discreet but clearly costly watch, the posture of someone accustomed to command. "David Anderson," she said, recognizing the name. "I read about you in the newspapers. How interesting that my daughter managed to find such a favorable match." Sarah felt her anger explode. "Leave!" "Sarah, Get out of my house now, before I call security." "This isn't your house," Ms. Johnson said, looking around the luxury apartment. "It's his. You're living here as a guest, just like I lived for years. Don't judge me for choices you're also making." David stepped forward, his voice low but threatening. "Mum, I think it's best if you leave." "And who are you to tell me to leave? The child's godfather?" "I'm Sophia's father," David said calmly, "and Sarah's partner. This is our home, our family, and you are not welcome here." Ms. Johnson laughed. "Father, you barely knew this woman a year ago. Don't be ridiculous." "More ridiculous would be a woman who abandons her daughters, trying to give family lessons," David shot back, keeping his voice controlled, but with a firmness that made Ms. Johnson take a step back. Sarah watched the exchange with a mix of gratitude and protection. It was the first time someone defended her so unconditionally, without questioning or judging. "Sarah," Ms. Johnson said, turning to her daughter, "you can't deny me the right to know my granddaughter." "I can, and I do." Sarah walked to the front door, opening it. "You lost any right to us the day you abandoned us. Sophia will not grow up knowing someone who can disappear from her life at any moment. You're making a mistake. I'm her grandmother. You're a stranger who just happens to share DNA with me," Sarah interrupted. "Miss Johnson, our housekeeper, has more right to the title of family than you." Ms. Johnson grabbed her bag, clearly realizing she wouldn't get what she wanted at that moment. "This isn't over, Sarah. I have legal rights." "Then use them," David said, appearing beside Sarah. "My lawyers would be happy to explain to you the concept of family abandonment and how it affects visitation rights." After Miss Johnson left, Sarah leaned against the closed door, trembling. All the adrenaline that had sustained her during the confrontation was dissipating, leaving her exhausted and vulnerable. "Sarah?" David gently touched her shoulder. "Are you okay?" "I don't know." She turned to him, and David saw tears in her eyes for the first time since he had known her. 12 years, David. 12 years without a word, and she shows up as if nothing happened, wanting to meet Sophia. David pulled her into his arms, holding her as she finally let the tears fall. "She's not getting near, Sophia, I promise." "How can you promise that? She's my biological mother. She might have rights." "Sarah, look at me." David held her face between his hands. "Any judge who looks at her history, abandonment, absence for over a decade, will understand that she doesn't represent the best interest of the child. And besides, I have very good lawyers." Sarah nodded, but she still looked visibly shaken. "Why now? Why did she show up now?" "Maybe because she saw that you are doing well, that you have a stable life. Some people only show up when they think they can benefit in some way." Raphael's intuition was right. In the following weeks, they discovered through a private investigator that Ms. Johnson was going through a difficult divorce and had lost custody of her other children. Her ex-husband had hired detectives who documented years of emotional and financial instability. "She's desperate," Raphael's lawyer explained during a meeting at the office. "She probably saw your financial situation and thought about trying for a reconciliation that could benefit her in some way." "What kind of benefit?" asked Sarah. "Financial support, a place to live, or simply the illusion that she is a good mother to use in the divorce proceedings?" Sarah fell silent, processing the information. The mother she had idealized for years, who had missed all the important moments of her life, had turned out to be exactly what she had always feared. Someone capable of using her own children for personal gain. "What do we do if she comes back?" she asked. "We already have a preventive restraining order," said the lawyer. "If she tries to make contact again without court authorization, we can take action immediately." That night, Sarah was on the balcony of the apartment, watching Emma sleep in the stroller beside her. The baby was growing quickly. She was already smiling consciously, babbling sounds that seemed like attempts at words, and following familiar faces with her eyes. "What are you thinking about?" Raphael joined her, bringing 2 cups of tea. "About how to protect her," Sarah said, gratefully accepting the tea. "I don't want Emma to grow up with the uncertainty that I grew up with. I want her to know that the people who love her will always be there." "They will be. We will be." Sarah looked at him. "Are you sure? Even if things between us get complicated, even if it doesn't work out romantically, will you still be her father?" "Sarah, Emma is my daughter in every way that matters. No matter what happens between us, and I don't plan for anything bad to happen, she will always have a father who loves her unconditionally. And if you marry someone else, if you have other children—" Raphael chuckled softly. "You really can't stop planning disasters, can you? It's a flaw of mine. It's a way to protect yourself, but Sarah—" He turned to look at her directly. "I don't want to marry anyone else. I want to marry you!" The words hung in the night air between them. It was the first time Raphael had mentioned marriage, and Sarah felt her heart race. "Raphael, I'm not asking now," he quickly added. "I know we're still getting to know each other, still building our foundation, but I want you to know that this is not a temporary relationship for me. You two are my future." Sarah looked at Emma, then back at Raphael. "You know I come with baggage, right? Crazy mother, dramatic sister, history of abandonment. And you know I come with chronic workaholism, controlling family, and 0 experience in healthy relationships." Raphael shot back. "I think we match perfectly." For the first time since Miss Johnson's visit, Sarah genuinely smiled. "We really are quite the pair." "We are a family," Raphael corrected, extending his hand to her. Sarah intertwined her fingers with his, watching Emma sleep peacefully. "Yes," she said softly, "we are a family." And for the first time in her life, Sarah truly believed that this family would not fall apart. There had been storms in the past, and there would certainly be more in the future, but they had built something strong enough to withstand it. Emma's first birthday arrived with an explosion of colors and joy that transformed Raphael's once formal apartment into something completely unrecognizable. Pink and gold balloons floated from the ceiling. A themed table with children's book characters occupied the dining room, and the sound of children's laughter echoed through the previously silent hallways. Sarah watched the scene with a smile on her face, holding an excited Emma, who was clapping for everything she saw. The baby had grown so much in the last few months, she could already stand with support, said a few words, like mommy, daddy, and woof woof for any animal she saw, and was developing a strong personality that closely resembled Sarah's determined temperament. "I can't believe it's been a year," said Lisa, appearing beside her sister with a plate of chocolate truffles in hand. "It feels like just yesterday you were in the hospital, all scared." "And now look at this," Sarah replied, watching Raphael on the living room floor, assembling a rocking horse that had arrived as a gift that morning. Who would have thought that the most feared CEO in New York would be capable of assembling toys? Lisa followed her sister's gaze. "He's changed a lot, hasn't he? At first I thought it was just a passing interest, you know, bored rich guy playing family, but seeing him with Emma—" Raphael was at that moment showing Emma how the rocking horse worked, making galloping sounds that elicited delighted giggles from the girl. His eyes sparkled with genuine happiness that completely contrasted with the serious image he cultivated in the business world. "He truly loves her," Sarah added, "and the most amazing thing is that she loves him too. When he comes home from work, Emma stops everything she's doing and crawls to him as fast as she can. And you two? How are things between you?" Sarah hesitated before answering. It was a question she often asked herself. In recent months, her relationship with Raphael had evolved into something deeper and more stable, but they still slept in separate rooms, still maintained certain emotional barriers. "We're good," she finally said. "Different from what we were at the beginning, but good." "Just good?" Lisa raised an eyebrow. "Sis, you live together, raise a daughter together, act like a couple in every way except for physical intimacy," Sarah completed. Softly, "I know." "Why? You like him. He clearly is crazy for you. It's complicated, Lisa. I don't want our relationship to be based solely on need or convenience. I want to be sure that it's real before taking that step." Lisa studied her sister's face. "Or maybe you're just scared." "Maybe a little of both." The party continued throughout the afternoon. Joseph and his wife came from the restaurant, bringing a huge lasagna and stories in Italian that made Emma laugh even without understanding a word. Miss Johnson had prepared a chocolate cake shaped like a book, a tribute to Sarah's love for literature and the future they hoped to build for Emma. As evening fell and the last guests said their goodbyes, the family of three was left alone in the messy living room, Emma finally asleep in Michael's arms after a day full of stimulation. "It was a perfect day," Sarah said, starting to pick up the scattered gift wrap on the floor. "Leave that for tomorrow," Michael said. "Ms. Johnson will take care of it in the morning." "I can't relax with the house a mess," Michael chuckled softly so as not to wake Emma. "It's amazing how you managed to have energy after organizing a party for 20 people. 23, Sarah corrected. "And it wasn't just me. You helped a lot. I set up toys and moved furniture. You organized everything: food, decorations, entertainment, coordinated schedules." Michael watched her methodically folding the used napkins. "You would make an amazing teacher." The mention of her studies made Sarah stop cleaning up. In recent weeks, she had been intensely focused on studying for the college entrance exam at City University. Michael had hired tutors for the subjects she struggled with the most, and they created a routine where she studied every morning while Emma napped. "I still don't know if I'll be able to pass," she said, sitting down next to him on the sofa. "You will. I saw your scores from the practice tests." "Practice tests are different from the real exam, and even if I pass, I don't know how we'll balance everything. College, Emma, our life." Michael carefully transferred Emma to the stroller next to the sofa, making sure she stayed asleep. "Sarah, can I say something?" "Sure." "You need to stop sabotaging your own chances of happiness." Sarah stared at him, surprised by his frankness. "What do you mean?" "I mean that every time something good is about to happen in your life, you find 1,000 reasons why it won't work out. When I suggested you study, you said you weren't capable. When you passed the practice tests, you said the real exam would be different. When you manage to pass the entrance exam, and you will, you'll find other obstacles." Sarah fell silent, processing his words. "Maybe because in my experience, when things are going too well, it's a sign that they're about to fall apart. Or maybe because you've never had someone who believed in you unconditionally." The response hit her like a punch. Michael was right. Even with all of Lisa's devotion, Sarah had always been the one responsible for taking care of everyone, never the one being cared for. "And do you believe unconditionally?" "I believe you can achieve anything you want. I believe you will be an amazing mother to Emma, an inspiring teacher to your future students, and—" he hesitated for a moment, "I believe you can be happy with me if you let yourself." "Michael, Sarah, I know we have an unconventional history. I know I made mistakes at the beginning, that you have reasons to be cautious, but it's been over a year that we've been building this together, and I can't pretend anymore that it's okay to keep this distance between us." Sarah felt her heart race. "What kind of distance?" "You know what kind." Michael turned to look at her directly. "We've been sleeping in separate rooms for months. We kiss each other on the cheek like friends. We act like roommates sharing a daughter, not like a couple." I thought you were comfortable with this arrangement. I was trying to respect your time, your space, but Sarah—" He reached out to touch her face. "I love you. I love you as a woman, not just as Emma's mother. And I think you feel the same way about me." The words Sarah had avoided admitting even to herself were finally spoken aloud. It was true. She loved him. She had fallen for the kind man who set up toys, who read stories to Emma with different voices for each character, who set aside important reports when she needed to talk. "I feel," she admitted softly. "But I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of ruining what we have, of fully giving ourselves and finding out that we don't work as a couple, and then Emma loses the father she loves, I lose my best friend, and we end up alone again." Michael held her hands between his. "Sarah, what we have is already real. We are already a true couple in every sense. We just haven't embraced that physically. We won't ruin anything. We'll complete something that already exists." They sat in silence for a few moments, looking at Emma, who slept peacefully, unaware of the conversation that would define the family's future. "What if it doesn't work out?" Sarah asked once more. "What if it does?" The simple question changed everything. Sarah realized she had spent so much time protecting herself from possible disappointments that she had forgotten to consider the positive possibilities. "Sarah," Michael said, getting up and extending his hand to her, "would you like to dance with me? Here, now, there's no music. There's the music of the air conditioning, of people talking outside, of the distant noise of traffic." He smiled. "It's the soundtrack of our real life." Sarah took his hand and stood up. Michael pulled her close, one hand on her waist, the other holding her hand. They began to move slowly, without hurry, just enjoying the closeness. "Michael," she murmured against his chest, "I love you too." She felt his muscles relax, as if a tension he had been carrying for months finally melted away. As the moment dissolved, he asked softly, "Are you sure?" "I'm sure I love you. I'm sure I want to try. And I'm sure I'm tired of being afraid." David stopped dancing and looked into her eyes. "Sarah Johnson, do you want to officially date me?" The formal question, asked with the seriousness of a business proposal, but with the tenderness of someone who truly cares, made Sarah laugh. "David Anderson, I accept to officially date you." They kissed for the first time since they met. Not a kiss of gratitude or comfort, but a kiss of real love, between two people who chose to build something together despite all obstacles. When they pulled away, Emma was awake in her crib, watching them with her big, curious eyes, as if she knew something important had happened. "I think she approves," David said, picking up their daughter. "I think she really does," Sarah agreed, kissing Emma's forehead. "So what do we do now?" "Now, we live one day at a time. We build our family, support your studies, raise Emma together, and see what the future holds for us. No contingency plans for disasters? No contingency plans for disasters." That night, Sarah moved her things into David's bedroom. It wasn't a dramatic or passionate gesture, but rather a practical decision made by two people who had finally admitted they wanted to share not just responsibilities, but also dreams, fears, and the future. When they woke up the next morning, with Emma babbling happily in the crib next to the bed, Sarah knew she had made the right decision. For the first time in her life, she wasn't planning an escape route. She was simply living and discovering that happiness was much simpler than she had imagined. 2 years later, on a sunny November morning, Sarah woke up to the familiar sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. Emma, now 3 years old, and with a strong personality like both of her parents, was clearly trying to help David prepare breakfast. The result, Sarah knew from experience, would be quite a mess and a lot of fun. "Daddy, I want to make pancakes!" Emma shouted with the determination of someone who already knew exactly what she wanted from life. "Then let's make pancakes, Princess," David replied, with that infinite patience he had developed over the years. "But first, you need to wash your hands." Sarah smiled, stretching in the bed she had now shared completely with David for almost 2 years. Next to her, on the nightstand, was her English degree from City University that she had received the previous week, after 4 years of studying while balancing motherhood and building her family. The graduation had been one of the most special days of her life. David had cleared important meetings to be there. Emma had worn a special pink dress for the occasion, and even Lisa, now married to an accountant she met in a cooking class, had taken a day off from the restaurant she was opening with her husband the following week. "Sarah," Emma's voice echoed through the apartment. "Mommy, come see, I made pancakes by myself." "I'm coming, sweetheart," Sarah replied, putting on her robe and walking toward the kitchen. The scene she found was exactly what she expected. Emma standing on a special chair next to the stove, wearing a small apron with a book print, and David beside her, clearly supervising closely but allowing their daughter to feel independent. The counter was dusted with flour, there were splatters of batter on the tiled walls, and Emma wore a proud smile that lit up her little face. "Look, Mummy, I'm a chef," Emma announced, pointing to the pancake, slightly crooked but perfectly golden, in the frying pan. "It's the prettiest pancake I've ever seen," Sarah said, kissing the top of her daughter's head. "You're becoming an expert in the kitchen." David approached Sarah, giving her a morning kiss. "Good morning, teacher," he said with that smile that still made her heart race after all these years. "Good morning." Sarah nestled against him for a few seconds, enjoying the feeling of completeness that had become routine but was never less special. "Daddy said there's a surprise today," Emma announced, clapping her hands and scattering flour in the air. "A surprise?" Sarah looked at David with curiosity. "What kind of surprise?" "The kind that you have to wait for until after breakfast," David said mysteriously, carefully flipping Emma's pancake. After breakfast, which included Emma's famous pancakes, now a weekend tradition, David announced they would take a stroll in Central Park. It wasn't unusual. They often spent Saturday mornings walking through the gardens, with Emma running between the trees while they talked about the work week. Sarah had started teaching at a private school in the southern part of the city, finally realizing her dream of teaching Brazilian literature. Her high school students adored her. She had a unique way of connecting the classics with contemporary reality, making Machado de Assis seem relevant to 16-year-olds. David, for his part, had delegated more responsibilities at the company to spend more time with the family, a change that his partners initially questioned but that paradoxically resulted in better company performance. "Why are you so nervous?" Sarah asked as they walked down the main path of the park. David was restless, checking his watch constantly and looking around as if searching for something. "Nervous? I'm not nervous," he said, but his voice clearly sounded tense. Emma was running a few meters ahead, chasing a golden retriever dog, whose owner smiled, amused by the interaction. The little girl had developed an obsession with animals that made Sarah seriously consider adopting a dog, despite the practical implications. "Mommy, Daddy, look!" Emma suddenly shouted, pointing to a group of musicians that had gathered near the lake. "There's music!" They approached the group. A string quartet played classics of Brazilian music. Some people had stopped to listen, and children danced spontaneously on the grass. Emma immediately joined the other children, spinning and laughing with total abandon. "She loves music," commented Sarah, watching her daughter dance. "Maybe we should think about piano lessons." "Maybe," agreed David, but his attention was clearly divided. It was when the musicians began to play Watermelon. Man, that Sarah realized something was definitely happening. David became more tense, checked his watch once more, and then, to his complete surprise, walked over to the musicians and whispered something in the lead violinist's ear. The music smoothly transitioned to an instrumental version of Cantaloupe Island, and David returned to where Sarah was, with an expression she had never seen before, nervous yet determined. "Sarah," he said, his voice slightly trembling, "do you remember the day we met? How could I forget? I walked into your office crying and you looked at me like I was an alien." David laughed, but still seemed nervous. "And do you remember what I said about never having anything worth staying for?" "I remember." Emma stopped dancing and ran back to them, seemingly sensing that something important was happening. She positioned herself next to Sarah, holding her mother's hand, but keeping her curious eyes fixed on David. "Well," David continued, "these last 3 years have proven I was right. You two are everything worth staying for, fighting for, living for." It was then that he knelt down. Sarah felt the world stop around her, the people in the park, the musicians, even Emma seemed to freeze as David pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "Sarah Johnson," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple yet elegant diamond ring. "Will you marry me?" Tears came immediately, along with a laugh that was part joy, part disbelief. "David, Daddy is asking Mommy to marry him," shouted Emma, clearly in on the plan, clapping excitedly. "Mommy, say yes." Sarah looked at David, the man who had walked into her life through the wrong door and transformed everything, the man who had held her hand during the premature delivery, who had assembled Emma's first crib, who had encouraged her to go back to school, who had become a father without hesitating for a second. "Of course I accept," she said, extending her hand for him to place the ring on. The park erupted in applause. People who didn't even know them had stopped to watch and were celebrating with them. The musicians turned up the volume of the music, and Emma danced around her parents with contagious joy. "When are you two getting married?" asked Emma, ever practical. "Can I wear a princess dress?" "Of course you can wear a princess dress," said David, picking up his daughter, "and you can be a bridesmaid too." "What's a bridesmaid?" "It's the most important person in the wedding after the bride and groom," explained Sarah, still admiring the ring on her hand. "So I'm the most important?" "You've always been the most important," said David, kissing her forehead. That afternoon, sitting on the porch of their apartment while Emma napped after a day full of emotions, Sarah and David planned the future they could finally embrace officially. "Nothing too big," said Sarah, snuggling into David's arm. "Just family and close friends." "Joseph will want to do the food," said David. "Miss Johnson will insist on organizing everything, and your sister will cry more than you." "Probably," Sarah laughed. "I still can't believe this is happening." "Better believe it. You'll be Sarah Anderson in a few months." "Sarah Anderson," she repeated, testing the sound. "It's strange to think about changing my name after all these years." "You don't have to change it if you don't want to, or you can be Sarah Johnson Anderson, or any combination you prefer." Sarah looked at him with that love that had grown slowly, solidly, built on a foundation of trust, respect, and true partnership. "I think I like Sarah Anderson. It sounds like a new beginning." "And that's what we are," said David, kissing her forehead. "A new beginning, for all of us." 6 months later, in a simple ceremony in the garden of the new house they had bought in the suburb, a place with a yard for Emma to play and space for the dog they had finally adopted, Sarah Johnson became Sarah Anderson. Emma was a bridesmaid wearing the most elaborate princess dress they could find. Lisa cried throughout the event, as expected, and Joseph outdid himself with a feast that fed the guests and still left leftovers for a week. But the most special moment wasn't the exchanging of rings, nor the vows they wrote for each other, nor even the kiss that officially sealed their union. It was when, during the first dance, Emma spontaneously joined them, and the three danced together as the family they had always been, just now with officially recognized roles. "Finally," David murmured in Sarah's ear as they slowly twirled with Emma between them. "Finally what?" "Finally a real family. Finally a home. Finally a life worth living." Sarah smiled, looking around at all the happy faces watching them. Lisa and her husband, Joseph and his wife, Miss Johnson, who had practically become a grandmother to Emma, their co-workers, the friends they had made together. It had been a long and sometimes difficult journey, with obstacles that seemed insurmountable and fears that almost tore them apart. But looking at David, her husband now, and Emma, the daughter they were raising together, Sarah knew that every tear, every doubt, every moment of uncertainty had been worth it. Because sometimes the best stories begin with a wrong door that leads us exactly where we always should be. And sometimes when you stop planning for disasters and start believing in possibilities, life surprises you with a happiness greater than you ever dared to dream.